You gave more than you were asked for. You showed patience when walking away would have been easier, offered support when no one noticed, and extended trust even when it wasn't returned. And yet there were moments when your kindness was met with indifference, when loyalty was overlooked, and your generosity was treated as weakness. It stings because you act from integrity, because you understand value, and yet the world often responds according to its own rules, not yours. Stoicism teaches that we cannot control the actions of others, only the clarity and virtue with which we respond. Your energy, your presence, your attention, these are powerful, but only when wielded with awareness. The strength of character is measured not by how much you give, but by how wisely you choose where and to whom you give it. Learning to honor your boundaries, to act intentionally rather than habitually, is not selfish. It is a discipline that protects your peace and cultivates respect. Over time, you begin to notice patterns in behavior, the repeated disregard, the unreciprocated effort, and the subtle ways your generosity is taken for granted. Recognizing these patterns is not cynicism, it is insight. It allows you to act from observation rather than expectation, to preserve your energy and to interact with discernment. You may have spent years assuming that others operate according to the same principles you live by. You extended trust to those who seemed deserving. You showed patience when walking away would have been simpler. You assumed that loyalty, honesty, and fairness were universal qualities. Yet, repeatedly, those gestures were met with indifference. Small acts of generosity went unnoticed. Significant sacrifices were minimized. Your willingness to support others was often mistaken for weakness. This discomfort can feel personal, as if there is a flaw within you. Stoicism teaches that this perception is a misinterpretation. The issue is not your character, it is the expectation that others will align perfectly with your values. Clarity comes from recognizing what is within your control and what is not. You can act with integrity, maintain your principles, and manage your intentions. But you cannot dictate the responses of others. When your kindness meets disregard, it is not failure. It is simply a mismatch between expectation and reality. Over time, you begin to notice patterns in behavior that were once obscured by repeated involvement. You may have excused behavior, forgiven without change, or adjusted endlessly for someone who did not reciprocate. Gradually, your energy erodes. Stoicism reminds us that peace comes not from controlling outcomes, but from aligning perception with reality. Giving indiscriminately without discernment sets you up for frustration. Awareness develops subtly, emerging from repeated observation rather than sudden insight. Hollow apologies, unreciprocated effort, and consistent misalignment between expectation and experience become evident. Recognizing these patterns is not cynicism, it is self-preservation. You begin to measure not the worthiness of your generosity, but the alignment of those who receive it. Where once generosity was automatic, it now becomes deliberate. Care is given to those who honor your trust. Energy is withheld from those who take it for granted. By observing and acting with intention, you protect the integrity of your actions and the value of your attention. This shift reshapes the emotional and relational landscape. Frustration diminishes because your satisfaction is no longer anchored to the behavior of others. Calm observation replaces reactive engagement. Stoicism emphasizes focusing on what is within your control, your judgments, choices, and intentions, while letting external variables unfold naturally. You give thoughtfully, withdraw when contributions are neither recognized nor safe, and refrain from correcting perceived wrongs unnecessarily. Boundaries become intuitive, and your presence communicates significance without demand or dramatics. By acting from observation rather than expectation, your interactions carry weight, your influence grows, and your energy is preserved. Generosity transforms from a reflex into a deliberate tool, a reflection of wisdom and self-respect. Your engagement is measured, meaningful, and sustainable. By subscribing, you are making a quiet commitment to yourself, to practice awareness, to cultivate reasoned action, and to engage in life with deliberate presence. Subscribing is not merely joining a channel, it is choosing to honor your own energy, invest in your growth, and refine the discipline of your attention. Through consistent reflection and observation, anticipatory insight emerges. You start to recognize subtle signs of misalignment early, long before patterns become entrenched. Stoicism teaches that foresight grounded in reality allows for measured response rather than reactive defense. Patience is no longer passive. It is attentive and deliberate, monitoring behavior while conserving energy and presence. This allows your kindness to maintain significance, preventing it from being eroded by repeated misuse. Observing patterns, understanding tendencies, and responding with intentionality cultivates self-trust, ensuring that your actions are guided by reason rather than emotional impulse. The discernment developed through this practice creates a posture of quiet authority, calm, aware, and influential. Ultimately, this perspective changes the quality of your interactions. You no longer extend generosity to meet expectation or to correct perceived flaws. You act in alignment with principle and observation. Stoicism teaches that external events are neither inherently good nor bad. They are tests of character and opportunities for reasoned response. Acting with intention and maintaining boundaries ensures that your influence is preserved, that your presence retains integrity, and that your internal balance is not compromised by the unpredictability of others. In this awareness, kindness is refined into deliberate action, creating sustainable relationships grounded in mutual recognition and respect. Your generosity becomes a reflection of intentional virtue, not an unexamined habit, and through this practice, you cultivate a life where clarity, presence, and influence coexist harmoniously. As these insights deepen, habitual projection of your own moral framework diminishes. Interactions are no longer opportunities for validation or disappointment. They are contexts for discernment and thoughtful engagement. Disillusionment fades because it is framed through observation rather than expectation. Stoicism emphasizes freedom as the understanding of what is within your control, a principle that anchors each relationship and guides every decision. Kindness is preserved, intentional, and resistant to misuse. The recognition that not all values are shared liberates you to act consistently with your principles, to invest where it is meaningful, and to maintain equilibrium regardless of others' responses. The result of this disciplined approach is subtle but profound. By aligning action with observation, protecting energy, and engaging selectively, you cultivate both virtue and influence. As Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." Respect is earned through consistency rather than demanded through reaction. Influence grows through presence and reason rather than through effort wasted on unreciprocated engagement. What once created frustration now becomes a practice of reflection, intentionality, and calm observation. Generosity exists not as a vulnerability, but as an expression of aligned principle. Your presence carries weight, your influence becomes meaningful, and your integrity is maintained. Through clarity, discernment, and deliberate action, relationships become sustainable, and interactions reflect the values you embody rather than the unexamined impulses of others. Every time you allow someone to cross a line, every moment you tolerate what feels wrong or inappropriate, you are unconsciously communicating to the world how it can treat you. Disrespect is not always dramatic. Often it is quiet, almost imperceptible, a series of small gestures that slowly erode the regard you deserve. Stoicism teaches that virtue is expressed through deliberate, reasoned action, not through passive acceptance of harm or inconvenience. When you consistently refrain from responding to behavior that undermines your integrity, it sends a subtle message that boundaries are flexible, that your patience can be tested without consequence. Over time, these small signals accumulate, and patterns emerge. The world does not interpret restraint as wisdom when it is unguarded. It interprets it as opportunity. Recognizing this requires careful observation and honest reflection on past interactions, noting the repeated moments when your generosity, trust, or attention was exploited. Unchecked tolerance gradually becomes a framework for repeated behavior. People learn not from words alone, but from the consistency of your responses, or the lack thereof. When no limits are enforced, behavior is unconsciously reinforced. Those who push boundaries without consequence will continue to do so because, at some level, they have learned it is safe. The Stoics remind us that freedom and peace are found in exercising judgment over what is within our control. You cannot change the choices of others, but you can control how you respond, and in doing so, you establish a measure of influence that protects your presence and energy. Boundaries are not barriers designed to punish. They are calibrations of your engagement, signals of respect for yourself and the order you maintain in your life. Acting consistently communicates these limits without requiring confrontation or theatrics, creating a subtle but powerful structure in how others interact with you. Maintaining these limits demands quiet discipline. It is not about aggression or proving a point. It is about preserving dignity and equilibrium. When you respond in ways that are measured and deliberate, the world begins to recognize the constancy of your principles. Those who previously overstepped begin to adjust their behavior, sometimes without overt acknowledgement. They learn through repeated observation that certain actions have consequences, and that your attention, your energy, and your trust are not infinite resources to be taken lightly. This recalibration does not rely on anger, manipulation, or coercion. It relies on consistency and self-respect. The subtle power in this approach is often more influential than dramatic confrontation because it communicates stability, awareness, and presence. The process of establishing boundaries requires self-awareness and reflection. Each act of measured response, each moment in which you assert limits calmly, reinforces the standard of how you will be treated. The Stoics teach that virtue is found not in external approval, but in internal alignment with reasoned judgment. By applying this lens, you see that respecting yourself is not an act of defiance, but an act of clarity. It allows you to maintain composure even when others test the edges of your patience. You are not acting out of fear, reaction, or resentment, but from the understanding that the structure of your life, your energy, your attention, and your presence must be preserved in order for you to live according to your principles. Disrespect often comes disguised as small inconveniences, fleeting slights, or overlooked commitments. You may have noticed that when minor offenses are tolerated repeatedly, they grow into more significant breaches. This is the nature of human behavior. Patterns are reinforced by outcomes, and repetition teaches expectations. When you fail to respond, even subtly, you create a precedent. The Stoics remind us that wisdom is demonstrated not by what is endured silently, but by the reasoned choices we make in response to circumstances. Tolerance, in its unchecked form, is interpreted as weakness. Not through judgment, not through reactive emotion, but through the simple observation of others. Your patience can be exploited, your kindness can be taken for granted, and your attention can be assumed. Recognizing this pattern is a first step toward recalibration. Responding with consistency is not the same as reacting impulsively. It is a practice of maintaining composure while enforcing limits. Each decision to assert your boundaries, even subtly, reshapes the expectations of those around you. The Stoic principle of focusing on what is within your control guides this practice. You cannot dictate behavior, but you can decide the terms of your engagement. By maintaining calm, thoughtful action, you preserve your presence and influence. Others begin to observe, adapt, and respond to the signals you send, often without overt confrontation. In this way, influence is exercised quietly yet effectively, ensuring that your generosity and attention are respected rather than exploited. In practicing this discipline, you cultivate presence in a deeper sense. Your interactions are guided not by reaction, but by conscious alignment with reason. Subtle responses, observed patterns, and consistent limits combine to produce a life in which dignity is preserved and respect is earned naturally. This approach does not require spectacle or dramatization. It requires observation, patience, and the quiet reinforcement of boundaries. As others adjust to the structure you establish, you experience a clarity in relationships and interactions that is both stabilizing and empowering. Through measured, deliberate action, the erosion of your energy, attention, and respect is prevented, replaced instead with a framework that sustains presence, influence, and integrity across all engagements. The cumulative effect of these practices is profound. You learn to navigate interactions with awareness rather than reaction, to engage selectively rather than indiscriminately, and to preserve your composure while asserting limits. Each moment in which you respond thoughtfully rather than tolerate endlessly strengthens your sense of agency. The Stoics emphasize that freedom arises from understanding what lies within your control and what does not, and this understanding shapes every interaction. By consistently acting in alignment with principle and reason, you teach the world how to treat you, not through confrontation or demand, but through the quiet, undeniable influence of disciplined presence. Respect, attention, and care are no longer assumed. They are earned, and your responses ensure that they are acknowledged and reciprocated appropriately. Silence is often mistaken for strength, yet there is a profound difference between quiet control and passive avoidance. Many of us have experienced the tension of holding our tongue, telling ourselves that restraint is the wiser path, only to watch situations fester and escalate because issues left unaddressed rarely resolve themselves on their own. Stoicism teaches that discernment must guide our actions, that timing, intention, and reason are what give virtue its power. Silence, when practiced deliberately, is not a retreat. It is a tool of influence, a reflection of presence that communicates as much as any spoken word. There is authority in composure, in the ability to observe without immediately reacting, in allowing moments to unfold so that the true nature of a situation and of those involved reveals itself. In contrast, silence born from fear or indecision sends a subtle but clear signal of vulnerability. It is not neutral. It carries meaning, often interpreted by others as hesitation, uncertainty, or lack of resolve. There is an unspoken authority in a measured pause, a presence that carries weight precisely because it is deliberate. When you resist the urge to react impulsively, you allow circumstances to unfold in ways that reveal the true stakes and the real intentions of those involved. People reveal themselves most clearly when they expect a reaction and are met with calm observation instead. This is the subtle power of strategic silence. It forces the environment to adapt, to reveal, to respond to the stability you project. Every uncalculated reaction dilutes influence. Every measured silence strengthens it. In embracing this discipline, you create a dynamic where your presence alone communicates vigilance, discernment, and composure. At the same time, silence requires careful reflection on its purpose. Remaining quiet indefinitely, hoping for problems to resolve themselves, often leads to escalation. Ignored issues compound, resentment grows, and patterns solidify in ways that demand far greater effort to address later. The key is not avoidance, but deliberate observation paired with timing. The Stoics teach that understanding the natural course of events, paired with reasoned action, is what produces wisdom and effective influence. Silence in this context is not passivity. It is an intentional choice that allows insight to guide the appropriate moment for engagement. By learning to distinguish between restraint rooted in strategy and silence rooted in fear, You transform what might appear to others as passivity into a quiet force that shapes outcomes without aggression. The discipline of silence also cultivates self-possession. In moments of tension, when emotions rise and impulses push toward immediate reaction, the ability to remain still, mentally and verbally, anchors you. Others may rush, argue, or attempt to provoke, but your measured observation signals a grounded presence. It communicates that you are not easily moved, that your attention and energy are not frivolously spent, and that your engagement carries weight because it is considered. This approach fosters a subtle influence over the environment, encouraging others to recalibrate their behavior, whether consciously or unconsciously. The quiet observer, grounded in reason, is often more commanding than the loudest voice in the room. Over time, consistent practice of strategic silence reshapes relationships and interactions. People begin to recognize the rhythm of your responses, the pattern of deliberate engagement, and the clarity of your presence. They understand that your involvement is neither impulsive nor indiscriminate. Each pause, each moment of quiet, signals intentionality. The Stoics remind us that wisdom is demonstrated in action informed by reason, not in unconsidered reaction. By exercising silence purposefully, you maintain authority, preserve energy, and allow space for clarity to guide each next step. Others adjust their expectations, often treating your time and attention with greater care because it is no longer unlimited, no longer assumed. Silence also offers insight into the world around you. In stillness, you observe without distortion, free from the noise of immediate reaction. Patterns, motives, and intentions become visible in ways that are otherwise obscured by haste or emotional interference. This insight allows you to act with precision when engagement becomes necessary, rather than responding blindly. Stoicism emphasizes that observation, reflection, and reason form the foundation of mastery over circumstance. Strategic silence is the embodiment of this principle. It is a deliberate act of presence that clarifies, informs, and positions you to respond effectively, not reactively. Through consistent practice, silence becomes a calibrated instrument, a reflection of inner discipline, and a measure of reason applied to life's unfolding circumstances. You learn to observe, to weigh, to understand before you respond. You allow the world to reveal itself, and in doing so, you ensure that when engagement occurs, it carries meaning, intention, and impact. This is the essence of strategic quiet. It protects, it commands, and it preserves the integrity of your presence. The subtle authority it generates is not sought for ego, but cultivated through conscious choice, awareness, and reasoned action. In this mastery of silence, you discover a form of influence that is enduring, resilient, and profoundly aligned with both self and circumstance. Once you begin to see the interplay between presence and absence, a new understanding emerges about the nature of influence and engagement. There is a subtle, almost imperceptible power in stepping back, in calibrating how much of yourself you invest in situations or people that do not reciprocate or respect your energy. Strategic detachment is not a matter of coldness or indifference. It is the conscious choice to allocate your attention and effort where it will be valued and effective. As Marcus Aurelius observed, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Stoicism reminds us that attachment to outcomes beyond our control is a source of unnecessary suffering. When your focus is invested in what cannot be guided or changed, it is wasted, leaving you depleted and vulnerable. By selectively investing your presence, you maintain both influence and integrity, ensuring that your interactions are deliberate, meaningful, and aligned with your values. This practice does not diminish generosity, it amplifies it, making your energy intentional rather than scattered, deliberate rather than assumed. Detachment is a discipline that requires awareness of your own boundaries and a clear understanding of what constitutes meaningful engagement. Your energy, your time, and your emotional availability are not infinite. They are resources that must be guarded, not hoarded, but allocated with discernment. Those who consistently disregard your effort, who take without reciprocation, or who diminish the value of your attention are not failures of character. They are indicators of misalignment. By observing these patterns and withdrawing or limiting engagement, you signal that your presence is not a commodity to be assumed, but a contribution that carries significance. In doing so, you establish a rhythm of interaction where your involvement is not automatic but deliberate, creating both clarity and respect in relationships. The power of absence lies not in avoidance, but in the quiet assertion of boundaries, demonstrating that what is freely given without discernment loses meaning, while what is measured retains weight and influence. Strategic detachment also reshapes the emotional landscape of your interactions. When you release the compulsion to be constantly available or to overextend, you remove the subtle tensions that arise from unbalanced relationships. The expectations of others no longer dictate your internal equilibrium. This is not withdrawal from connection. It is the establishment of a framework where engagement occurs on fair and mutually respectful terms. Stoic philosophy emphasizes that freedom is achieved not through control of external events, but through mastery of one's responses and the judicious allocation of effort. By deciding where your energy is warranted, you cultivate both resilience and influence. Relationships become more transparent, interactions more deliberate, and your presence acquires a weight that comes from conscious allocation rather than habitual availability. Absence is no longer empty, it is purposeful, a signal that guides behavior and conveys significance without a word. With practice, this approach begins to recalibrate the dynamics of your relationships naturally. Those who value your presence will rise to meet it with attentiveness and consideration. Those who have taken it for granted will begin to recognize its significance in subtle ways. Detachment does not create drama, it creates clarity. It establishes a standard of interaction that is observable and consistent, shaping behavior without force or confrontation. The Stoics teach that influence flows from reasoned action and alignment with principle, not from coercion or reactive control. By strategically modulating presence and absence, you reinforce standards, protect your energy, and allow relationships to operate on terms that are both equitable and sustainable. The scarcity of your availability elevates its value, restoring the equilibrium that unguarded generosity often undermines. This practice also strengthens self-mastery, the discipline required to withdraw without emotional reaction, to limit engagement without resentment, and to allow absence to communicate significance, fosters an internal fortitude that is both subtle and profound. Each choice to invest selectively builds confidence in your judgment and reinforces the principle that your time, attention, and energy are assets to be managed deliberately. Over time, the habitual practice of measured presence and absence cultivates a mindset where you are neither reactive to external pressures nor dependent on external validation. Your engagement becomes an extension of reasoned principle rather than impulse or habit. In this space, strategic detachment functions as a safeguard, preserving influence, protecting integrity, and enhancing the effectiveness of every deliberate interaction. Detachment also deepens the clarity of perception. By stepping back, you gain perspective on patterns that were previously obscured by constant involvement. Subtle dynamics, unspoken motives, and underlying behavioral tendencies emerge into view, providing insight that informs future engagement. This allows you to act with precision, choosing when presence is necessary and when absence communicates more effectively. Stoicism emphasizes observation, discernment, and measured response as foundations of mastery. In applying these principles, detachment becomes not an act of avoidance, but a method of engagement through refined awareness. The world is observed rather than reacted to, and your energy is deployed where it will have the greatest impact. The intentionality of selective presence transforms relationships into reflections of principle rather than arenas of overextended effort. As this practice becomes habitual, the subtlety of absence enhances the potency of every action. Engagement is no longer assumed or indiscriminate. It is purposeful, deliberate, and measured. The Stoics emphasize that freedom and power arise from mastery of judgment and action rather than external control. Through strategic detachment, you cultivate influence without conflict, authority without aggression, and significance without overextension. Every choice to step back, to limit availability, and to invest selectively reinforces clarity, maintains equilibrium, and preserves the integrity of your presence. Relationships adapt, expectations align, and the value of your engagement is restored, not through force, but through the deliberate, quiet application of reason and principle. There is a persistent temptation, after enduring repeated disregard or being consistently overlooked, to react impulsively. Anger surges in those moments, a force that promises immediate assertion of authority, a way to demand recognition or reclaim the respect you feel is owed. Yet this instinct, powerful as it feels, often works against the very control it seeks to establish. Stoic philosophy reminds us that external validation is fleeting and unreliable. What defines you is not the reactions of others, nor the injustices they perpetuate, but the deliberate way in which you choose to respond. Responding with precision, rather than force, communicates strength far more effectively than an outburst ever could. It demonstrates awareness, self-possession, and an understanding that influence flows from composure, not from the volume of your expression. The truly powerful do not measure themselves by intensity or aggression, but by restraint and the clarity of their actions. Anger can appear compelling, but it is deceptive. In the moment it feels like control, yet it seeds influence to those who provoke it. When you react impulsively, your energy is spent amplifying the disturbance rather than resolving it. Calmness, by contrast, signals mastery over self, the ability to assess the situation without being overwhelmed by it. The way you conduct yourself under pressure communicates far more than any words could, shaping perception and recalibrating dynamics in subtle yet undeniable ways. Stoic discipline teaches that mastery of emotion equates to mastery of circumstance. When you govern your responses, you govern the environment around you, steering interactions toward reason rather than chaos. Control over reactions begins with internal awareness. Recognizing the moment when impulse rises is the first step toward measured action. It requires observing not only the external behavior of others, but also your own internal tendencies, understanding the triggers that provoke immediate emotional responses. Through disciplined reflection, you learn to separate instinct from intentional response, distinguishing between what is fleeting and what is strategic. This awareness is subtle. It is the difference between snapping in frustration and pausing with intent, between reacting to be seen and acting in alignment with principle. In this space, calm is not passivity. It is active engagement with clarity and control, a demonstration of resilience that speaks without aggression. Anger may provide the illusion of dominance, but it is transient and often self-defeating. Stoicism teaches that true authority is not declared through bursts of emotion, but through consistency and reasoned action. A moment of measured response can outweigh repeated moments of reactive energy. It demonstrates to others that you are not driven by provocation, but guided by principle. Each controlled interaction reinforces your presence and influence, establishing a pattern in which your composure becomes the standard against which others unconsciously measure themselves. By mastering your reactions, you maintain sovereignty over your experience and ensure that external disturbances do not dictate your state of mind or the outcomes of your engagements. The practice of controlling reactions also extends to perception management. Over-explaining, justifying, or defending yourself to those who have already made up their minds is a surrender of influence disguised as explanation. In moments of provocation, it is easy to feel compelled to clarify your intentions or assert correctness. Stoicism advises against this. Your response carries authority precisely because it is measured, purposeful, and free from the need for external approval. Calm, deliberate action conveys clarity and competence far more effectively than lengthy rationalizations, which often signal insecurity or reactive attachment. By controlling your response rather than attempting to control perception, you preserve both power and integrity simultaneously. Repeatedly practicing this discipline cultivates an internal stability that informs all interactions. Each decision to act with restraint strengthens awareness, fortifies patience, and reinforces confidence in your judgment. You learn that influence is derived not from dominating the moment, but from shaping it with precision. This internal fortitude manifests externally as a presence that commands respect without coercion, subtly guiding others to recognize the weight and intentionality of your engagement. Mastery of reaction is not simply about self-control, it is about aligning your behavior with principle, creating a consistent standard that others can recognize and respond to appropriately. Ultimately, controlling your reactions preserves energy, amplifies influence, and ensures that your presence is respected for its deliberation rather than its impulsiveness. Calmness communicates sovereignty, clarity communicates discernment, and the disciplined exercise of emotional control conveys authority without aggression. By responding with intention rather than impulse, you shape the narrative of interactions, protect your equilibrium, and assert a quiet, undeniable power. The mastery of reaction becomes a defining characteristic of presence, a demonstration of reason applied under pressure, and a tangible expression of influence that does not require dramatics or confrontation. It is through this practice that you achieve both internal balance and external authority, asserting control over circumstances by first mastering yourself. The value of silence lies in its ability to create awareness without confrontation. By refraining from immediate reaction, you allow the consequences of behavior to manifest naturally. Those who have relied on your continual availability and unearned generosity begin to recognize the significance of your presence. Absence becomes a quiet signal, a demonstration of self-respect, and a reflection of standards that are neither negotiable nor easily dismissed. In removing your energy from situations that fail to honor it, you create a feedback loop in which the environment recalibrates itself around your limits. The process is not aggressive. It does not demand acknowledgement or apology. Instead, it communicates clarity of principle and consistency of action, qualities that are far more compelling than any verbal insistence on respect. The unspoken authority embedded in strategic silence communicates control, wisdom, and presence without the need for spectacle. Through deliberate silence, you also gain a heightened sense of perception. When removed from the noise of reactive engagement, you can observe patterns with greater clarity. Repetition of behavior, subtle shifts in attitude, and the true disposition of those around you emerge in ways that were previously unnoticed. This clarity allows you to make decisions from a position of understanding rather than impulse. Stoic thought teaches that observation, reflection, and reason form the foundation of mastery over circumstance. When your response is withheld strategically, you gain the perspective necessary to assess the value of continued engagement, the appropriateness of investment, and the alignment of others' behavior with your principles. Every moment of quiet adds a layer of insight, allowing measured action to follow with greater precision and effectiveness. Silence also functions as a form of recalibration within relationships and interactions. When you withdraw attention and availability from those who exploit your energy, you are not creating distance as punishment, but as a corrective force. People begin to adjust, often subconsciously, to the absence of what they had previously assumed would be unlimited. They encounter the natural consequences of overstepping boundaries and begin to evaluate their behavior in light of your measured presence. This is not manipulation in the conventional sense, it is alignment. The environment and the individuals within it respond to the structure you silently enforce. By removing yourself from unreciprocated dynamics, you reshape the expectations, restore balance, and reinforce the value of your engagement. Strategic silence communicates standards without requiring confrontation and preserves dignity without aggression. The practice of deliberate silence also strengthens your internal resilience. Each instance in which you refrain from reactive engagement is an exercise in self-mastery, reinforcing the capacity to maintain composure in the face of provocation or disregard. The act of observing rather than reacting cultivates a stable mental posture, one in which presence is maintained and influence is preserved without surrendering energy unnecessarily. By choosing when to speak and when to remain quiet, you assert control over your own state of mind while shaping the interactions of others. The subtlety of this influence is profound. It communicates authority, awareness, and consistency without the need for dramatics. People begin to respond not to words, but to the deliberate, composed energy you project. Deliberate silence also provides a protective function, shielding your energy from unnecessary depletion. When you respond impulsively to provocation or demand, you surrender control to external forces. By contrast, withholding response allows you to maintain sovereignty over your attention and priorities. This measured absence does not close you off from engagement, but it ensures that your investment is reserved for situations and people aligned with your values. The quiet creates a boundary that is both observable and unassailable, preserving influence while preventing misuse of your attention. In this way, silence becomes a tool for maintaining equilibrium, restoring balance in interactions, and reinforcing the significance of your presence without demanding explicit acknowledgement. Ultimately, strategic silence communicates authority and cultivates respect in a way that words alone cannot. It allows you to observe, to reflect, and to act from a position of understanding rather than impulse. Those around you begin to internalize the weight of your measured absence, adjusting their behavior to the standards implicitly communicated. As Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This form of engagement demonstrates mastery over circumstance, presence, and energy, reinforcing influence without confrontation. Stoicism emphasizes that the true measure of control lies in the management of one's own responses and the deliberate allocation of effort. By wielding silence intentionally, you ensure that your presence is valued, your influence is preserved, and your energy is safeguarded. It is through this quiet, disciplined practice that you reshape dynamics, command respect, and maintain composure, allowing your engagement to carry both weight and meaning. Through consistent application, strategic silence becomes a foundation of presence. It allows for observation, insight, and recalibration in a way that active intervention often cannot. By withdrawing energy from those who fail to honor it, you create clarity in both perception and action. Consequences unfold naturally, patterns are revealed, and your interactions are filtered through principle rather than reaction. This approach strengthens internal resilience, restores equilibrium, and fosters influence that is quiet yet undeniable. In mastering the practice of deliberate silence, you convert absence into a tool for authority, reflection, and measured engagement, ensuring that every interaction aligns with your standards while preserving both dignity and composure. Kindness, when extended indiscriminately, can easily become a liability, a channel through which energy is depleted and effort is taken for granted. True generosity is not automatic. It is not something owed to anyone merely by virtue of their presence. Stoicism teaches that every action should be guided by intention, that thoughtless giving diminishes both the giver and the impact of the gesture. By cultivating discernment in how you extend your warmth, attention, and care, you preserve the value of your engagement and protect the integrity of your own spirit. When generosity is measured and deliberate, it transforms from a reflexive habit into a conscious statement, a reflection of self-respect and insight. This is not an abandonment of empathy, but an elevation of it, where giving becomes meaningful, where presence is not assumed, and where effort is deployed with awareness rather than compulsion. Selective kindness requires careful observation of those around you and the patterns of their behavior. It involves recognizing who reciprocates respect and who consistently disregards the value you offer. Those who honor your presence, who respond with integrity, attention, and gratitude, are the ones who deserve the full measure of your generosity. Others who exploit your patience, take advantage of your openness, or treat your time as a given, receive measured detachment. This is not a matter of judgment or moral condemnation. It is a recognition of alignment. By responding proportionally to the behavior you encounter, you establish boundaries that are both protective and instructive. Your presence, energy, and attention retain significance, and interactions become reciprocal rather than one-sided. In doing so, kindness evolves from vulnerability into a conscious expression of strength. The discipline of selective giving reinforces internal clarity and stability. When your acts of care are intentional rather than automatic, each gesture carries weight and purpose. Stoicism teaches that virtue resides not in the sheer volume of our actions, but in the alignment of those actions with reason and principle. By carefully choosing where to invest your energy, you maintain equilibrium, ensuring that your effort contributes meaningfully to relationships and endeavors that recognize its value. Over time, this approach fosters a deeper sense of self-possession and autonomy. You are no longer compelled by habit, obligation, or impulse. You act from conscious choice, and your engagement is calibrated to reflect both insight and discernment. The quality of your presence becomes apparent, resonating with those capable of appreciating it and signaling standards to those who would otherwise take it for granted. Practicing selective kindness demands ongoing awareness and reflection. You observe patterns, note consistencies, and respond accordingly, ensuring that engagement is appropriate and sustainable. This does not mean withdrawing care indiscriminately or becoming cold. It means acting with intelligence, applying judgment to where effort is invested. Stoicism teaches that freedom and virtue are maintained through reasoned action. By giving where it is valued and withdrawing where it is not, you protect both your resources and your integrity. Your generosity becomes sustainable because it is anchored in intention rather than compulsion. The energy you offer carries significance. Your attention is impactful, and your presence is meaningful. Those who receive it understand that it is not owed, but earned, and in that recognition, interactions are elevated and reciprocation becomes natural. Selective kindness also cultivates resilience in the face of disregard. When you no longer extend effort or warmth to those who exploit or ignore it, the emotional weight of disappointment diminishes. You are not vulnerable to repeated exploitation because your engagement is guided by observation and discernment. The Stoics teach that the external behavior of others should not dictate the balance of our inner life. By calibrating your generosity according to alignment with your principles, you maintain both composure and autonomy. You preserve the significance of your actions while ensuring that energy is not wasted in unreciprocated effort. The balance between care and detachment allows you to interact freely, offer warmth genuinely, and sustain integrity in all relationships. Over time, the practice of selective kindness strengthens both influence and presence. Your measured generosity communicates authority, clarity and discernment without needing to demand recognition or enforce compliance. Those who respect your standards engage in more meaningful ways, while those who disregard them encounter the natural consequence of measured detachment. Kindness, once indiscriminate and potentially draining, becomes a form of strategic engagement, an intentional expression of value and insight. The Stoics emphasize that virtue expressed with deliberation is resilient and sustainable. By giving thoughtfully, you preserve the integrity of your effort, the clarity of your intentions, and the impact of your presence. In this balance, generosity is transformed into wisdom applied, creating interactions that are both equitable and enduring. Ultimately, selective kindness is a reflection of strength rather than vulnerability. By protecting what you give, you ensure that your energy, attention, and warmth retain their significance. Those who align with your values receive abundance, those who do not encounter distance. In this way, generosity becomes sustainable, presence becomes respected, and virtue is acknowledged and appreciated rather than overlooked. The practice of measured kindness communicates insight, discernment, and self-respect, cultivating interactions that are reciprocal, intentional, and enduring. It allows your influence to persist quietly but undeniably, your relationships to function on equitable terms, and your engagement to maintain both meaning and impact. In mastering this approach, kindness becomes a conscious expression of wisdom, a deliberate reflection of strength, and a tool through which your principles are preserved and recognized. Through the disciplined application of selective generosity, you create a framework in which every act of kindness carries purpose. You are no longer subject to the depletion caused by unreciprocated effort or unearned assumption. Energy is allocated according to alignment, attention is given where it is valued, and warmth is offered where it is respected. Stoicism teaches that intention governs the effectiveness of action, that measured engagement preserves equilibrium, and that the value of what is offered is magnified when it is consciously given. By maintaining this principle, kindness is protected, influence is enhanced, and the integrity of your presence is secured. Each act of generosity consciously deployed becomes a testament to awareness, discernment, and the quiet power of reason applied to life and relationships. Remember, your kindness is not a limitless resource to be assumed, but a reflection of your discernment, your strength, and your clarity. Protect it, give it deliberately, and watch as your presence transforms the world around you. Take the next step in refining your awareness and influence by watching one of the suggested videos on the screen. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal and for committing to a life guided by reason, presence, and intentional action.